Ah, there you go, folks. Got some pill ply released on our demonstration piece of marine ply with the vinyl ester. Now, if you missed the 2 previous episodes leading up to this, we talked a lot about material selection and how to actually fiberglass. But this episode is going to be all about applying a filler. We're going to be smoothing this out and making it so that we can apply some gel coat on this. Let me introduce myself first, folks, though. If you're new to the channel, my name is Joe Buskins. I'm a 2nd-generation professional boat builder, 100-ton licensed captain, and this is our family's boat shop. And we're going to jump right into applying some material. Now, again, if you missed the previous episode, we applied some of this peel ply, and I wanted to show the difference in the texture you get with peel ply, which was all along in here, and straight up CSM without any kind of a peel ply on it, which is kind of traditionally what we've done in a lot of cases. And we're going to be doing some sanding and fairing, and as always on the channel, I want to give you folks some kind of low cost entry point options and some variations here, just to know there's multiple ways. Now, you can go old school and just use your little sanding block and do some surfacing there. It's surprisingly good. They got bigger ones. If you want to move up the food chain a little bit, a little DeWalt sander. This thing's just an orbital. That works quite well. You can see one reason I like to run these little discs with a larger pad than the disc is you can kind of work into the corners very nicely. Now, if you were doing some crazy heavy duty grinding, matter of fact, good idea to have a vacuum assist sander if your budget allows it, if you can have some fans rolling, or a lot of times we will use a big shop vac to help kind of capture and collect that dust as we go. I just want to show you folks briefly though what your options are. Moving on up even a little bit further, you can use a variable speed buffer, and you can change the settings there from really slow to really fast. You see that is very controlled. We're using a fairly aggressive pad on there. That is a 40 grit. And if you really want to go all in, even though this doesn't look like a big intimidating tool, if you're going to be doing any amount of fiberglass work, it's hard to beat a little high speed angle grinder. This one's from DeWalt, but Bosch, Makita, I mean Milwaukee, there's a lot of good ones out there. And you can even go to like Harbor Freight and whatnot. I mean, it doesn't have to be high end, although I find that like DeWalt tools seem to be a really good all around medium. Now we're going to go over here. Oh, that one's finicky. That's what fiberglass. That's what fiberglass. Let me see if I can get that one working. Y'all follow me for a second though. Sometimes, need a hammer. Sometimes you'll get some fiberglass dust in the switch or in, and sometimes you can turn this thing on. There you go. Now again, we got fans moving across. You can see there, just like that. I'm not going to do anything super heavy duty. Now, one advantage, or one thing you're going to notice right away though, is when you're sanding on a surface that had the peel ply used on it, you're not going to get as much gumming up of the paper. You don't have to put anything on there. Come over on this side. You notice it's a little more, it's going to be a little more gummy. I hope that shows. Yeah, you can see those little globs of material on there. Now, I know there's a lot of debate sometimes, folks, that like when you apply resins, a lot of folks are like, you got to put a gel coat over it with some wax, or a coat of gel coat with wax, or a coat of resin with wax to cure it. In our family's boat shop, we've always used like laminating resins that stay tacky. And I don't personally like putting a final coat of resin with wax on something like this that I know I'm going to be applying a body filler over. You want it to be sticky and tacky. So that's just a personal thing. I know a lot of people have those questions, but we don't hardly ever personally add any wax or modifier C solution to resin or gel coat unless we are completely done with a project. And if it's an interior compartment that we just don't want it to be tacky, then in that case you may do it. But you're never going to see me adding wax to it when it's something that we're fixing to put a filler over, because that wax could potentially inhibit the bond of your filler if you don't get all of it removed. So I'm going to take a few minutes here. I'm actually going to put a respirator on and some gloves. Take a few minutes and do a little bit of sanding here. I may show you all a couple snippets on the way, and then we're going to move right into putting some body filler on this. Different fillers and putties. There's fillers and putties you can make. There's pre-made. But today we are going with a couple products from Total Boat. That's a polyester. This is a structural repair filler, which is kind of cool. This one is a high strength bonding and repair compound, and it has milled glass fibers, which are the same materials that we added into, if you remember when we were fiberglass in this and we did our fillet down in the corner, we took some vinyl ester resin and made our own. But it's kind of nice to be able to buy it. And then this is a polyester fairing compound, but this is for fairing and cosmetic repairs. So it's not really a structural thing. You're going to want to apply it in fairly thin applications, and typically polyester products are going to be above the water line, whereas like our vinyl esters that we used in the past or epoxy is going to be mostly for your below the water line. Now we're also going to be doing something, there's probably not a bad idea to use some kind of a dewaxer and surface prep. Now in the past, a lot of times, and I'll show you folks a couple of options, I have found that you can put acetone in one of these ZEP sprayers, and sometimes we will just use that. I'll usually go right over something like this that we can handle. And that is a pretty efficient way to get any dust and kind of clean any potential contaminants off of there. Now, we know that this is clean. I've been working with gloves, which a lot of people don't realize it, but you can have salts and oils and contaminants if you go out to lunch and have a hamburger and fries and come back and touch something you're getting ready to paint or gel coat. That is not good. Some of that oil is going to potentially get on there, and it will keep your materials from bonding properly. So wiping down with some acetone or the dewaxer, what's cool about it is it's slower evaporating, and it's going to do a little better job of cleaning up, especially when you know there's wax. Like we were talking about earlier, if you add some wax to your resin or gel coat and you've had to sand it off of there. So that's something very important to keep in mind. Now we're going to let this acetone flash off of here. I'm going to get some putty ready to go and moving on to the next phase. Now I wanted to show you folks at home a little trick. What we have here is a flexible spreader. That's a Bondo brand, but you can get them from a lot of different places. And sometimes what we like to do is modify them. You'll notice this has got a nice sharp corner, which that's how it comes from the factory. But I want a nice radius in that corner where we had the fillet. And sometimes you need a custom contour. And it's easy as taking one of your little 3M blocks. This is some 80 grit paper. And it's quite easy to modify that. I find a lot of times, even if you're doing a large area, if you round the corners on your spreaders, you don't leave track marks or lines on the surface. So So you've got that rounded off with the more aggressive one, and a lot of times I'll switch over to like some 220, and you can kind of sand off the little burrs there and custom make. Now I've done that with some of my bigger spreaders too. Like this is just a big drywall knife, but I've put 2 different contours. You can see that one is a sharper radius than that one. So kind of depending on what we're working on, you can use one side if it's a sharper one, or if you want a little more filler in the corner, you can use the other side. And that's something you folks can do at home to kind of give yourself some custom tools for a very inexpensive price. That should be about right. And you can kind of come in here and test that, and that is spot on. That fits right down in the corner beautifully. And you want to use as wide a blade or spreader as you can. This is typically the widest version, but you want to cover most or all of the panel that you're going to be applying filler to if possible. Now that's especially important when you are fairing it out. Now when you're putting in just some raw filler, like say for example we have that little imperfection right there, that's not major, and honestly you probably could get away with using just the polyester fairing filler, but I thought you folks at home might enjoy seeing how this works. It's pretty cool stuff. It's got a unique texture, a unique look and feel to it. And I'm going to go with a smaller blade here. That's something you can also do, is you can take a razor knife and cut these down to like whatever size you need. That's a smaller one with a bit of a radius on there. Now on this kind of stuff, you're going to be using a activator or catalyst. You're going to use a little bit of MEKP. That's going to come with this product when you order it. There we go. And we're probably going about 6 or 7 drops. I'm going to say 6 ought to be plenty for that. I'm trying to hurry things along. And remember folks, in the wintertime you can get away with putting more catalyst or activator. In the summertime you would put a lot less. If you're working out in the sunlight, that's going to accelerate things. And you could have used this same material for doing the fillet. Again, like I said in the previous episodes, if you missed those, talked all about surface prep. Now's a good time to tell everybody thank you so much for tuning in. I try to really let y'all know how much I appreciate everybody. I feel like some of you folks out there have kind of become my friends, and generally I see your comments and recognize your names and look forward to hearing from you. Lots of positivity out there. It's good to hear about what kind of projects you're working on. It always makes me feel good when you've had success with some of the principles we've shown you folks. And if you're new to the channel or haven't already subscribed, that really helps the algorithm, as does the long watch time. So when you click on there and you watch a couple episodes in a row, or late at night if you're just around the house and want to have something on and you're just trying to soak up some boat building knowledge while you're cooking dinner or something, it would be awesome if we could be there to entertain you folks. Maybe provide a little subliminal, subconscious boat building knowledge and information there in the background. Now you'll notice I am kind of cutting through that. I like to spread it out. We'll scoop it back up, lay it down, kind of cut through it, pick it back up, spread it out, cut through it. You just want to be sure you get a really nice uniform mix. I probably mix for at least a minute. All right, that should be good. Now one other thing, sometimes there will be some residue up on your blade. I always like to be sure to clean that off. A lot of times you may have a little bit of unmixed material there. Take that, cut it back in, give it one more little pass. You should be good to go. All right, so we had that one little divot right there. That's probably, a 1/16 of an inch or so. It's not much, and it's not gonna take much material, but this is a good time for me to show you folks how easy it works. It was just like that, one wipe in. Now you can do a little more to it if you want to. Totally up to you. And that honestly was something that could have been optional. Now you can see right here where we sanded this, you can see where the layers overlapped, and you can see that's a little bit darker in color. That means it's a little bit lower than the area around it, and I can actually feel that with my hand. So I've got a little bit of filler. There's no reason to waste that. I could go ahead and take this, apply it right in that little slightly low area. I always like to look around and see if there's anything else. See, there's a couple maybe little low spots right there. Don't have much left, but maybe enough to drop some of this slightly heavier duty material in there. It's good to have some variety. Something like this would be a good idea to have in your fiberglass kit. I always like to look around and see if there's anything maybe a little bit low right there. Don't want to waste this stuff. A lot of people are maybe cautious about getting into doing fiberglass work, and this channel is all about helping to encourage folks to give it a try. Not that everybody wants to get in the business professionally, but getting really hard to find folks to do this kind of work, and it can be fairly expensive, or you may have to drive a long way to get this kind of work done. And it's good to know that if you start small and practice on something, if you make a mistake, that's the cool thing with fiberglass is you may have to do a little bit of sanding and grinding to get it opened back up, but you can come back in and patch it or repair it or refill it. So don't let that stop you from trying to work with this stuff. And all these folks that we work with, man, I don't use materials in the shop unless I have had good success with them and really enjoy working with them. And I want to make it simple. There can be thousands of products out there, and it can be bewildering. And we want to make fiberglass and boat work fun. And when I say boat work too, you can work on your RV. I know there are folks that do model airplanes, even light aircraft. People build some really, really cool stuff out there. And it opens up a whole world when you get comfortable with this material. So we're going to give this a few minutes. Now I want to show you folks at home another little trick. One thing we should have done, and I did it before I applied this, but I didn't show, is I did take a sampling of the surface temperature. We're at 69 degrees right now, which is totally within spec for doing this kind of work. Typically on the very low end, 60 degrees for gel coat, putties, and fillers. But if you're on kind of a cool day, I want to demonstrate real quick here. We can use our little Wagner and just make some nice little passes. I want to go ahead and accelerate this filler. I want to go ahead and get it to cure. Now notice, very important not to stay in one spot because this thing gets insanely hot. So I'm just throwing a little bit of heat there where we added some filler, back and forth. And you need to use these two items together though. So we had 69 degrees, now with just a little bit of 86 degrees. So when you're at home and people, it's in the wintertime and you think you can't get any gel coat work done or do a little repair job, if you use like a halogen heat lamp and a little Wagner and you can kind of just create a bit of a microclimate, you can do all kind of cool little projects, even if it's really cold outside. Here we go with the polyester fairing compound. Now, anytime I get a new container of material in the shop, I generally like to give it a good mix. If it's resin, we will shake it or agitate it thoroughly. If it's a kind of a putty or a filler, you want to go all the way down to the bottom, kind of scrape the sides. Now this is good fresh material and it's nice and ready to go, but always a good idea, no matter what you're using, to mix it thoroughly. Now we've given our structural filler a little time to cure. That has tacked off there. You can see it's not even sticking to my finger. So we're in pretty good shape with that. And the using a little Wagner really helped a lot with that to move things along. Because today we're kind of holding in the 60s, which is totally fine, but usually mid 70s or so is going to be pretty optimal. Now I'm going to go ahead and mix a fairly large batch, and I wanted to show you folks all of these putties are supplied with a little bottle of MEKP hardener, but sometimes in the shop we'll use larger quantities. I like to use these little squeeze bottles, and I know if you've been following the channel, you've seen me use this before. Now that is your MEKP, or methyl ethyl ketone peroxide, but we added a touch of a red dye. That's from Norox. It's a red dye concentrate. I will see if we can't find a good source for that, but if you ever find any, that might be something you want to grab a bit of, because what it'll do is it'll allow you to see. Now generally the same deal with this versus that is probably going to be on the hot side. Again, this is a demonstration piece, usually 1 to 2%. Now, important to note, if you're new to dealing or working with MEKP, it is not pleasant stuff to get on your skin, certainly not on your eyes. Always want to wear gloves, eye protection. A Tyvek suit's not a bad idea. If I were at home doing this or just in the shop normally, I'd be wearing a respirator. You should be doing the same, but for demonstration purposes. Now, what's nice again is with the red dye in there, you can see when the catalyst is completely integrated into your putty. And it's kind of the same deal. I usually like a kind of a scoop and a chop, and I'll come back from the other side, scoop and chop. Now, important to note, I see a lot of people use a lot of different materials for their mixing boards, and I get questions on this. This is just some old sign material. You might be able to go to a local sign shop. Sometimes they'll have little remnants or scraps, and I had one of our viewers even mention that he used some old political signs, something that you can recycle there after, obviously after it's been used or discarded or disposed of or no longer in use. And you want a nice mixture with no streaks. That's very important. You want a good consistent mix, which we have there. Now again, I typically like to use the broadest blade that I can possibly use when applying material, and a lot of times it's just a good idea to get some on the surface, kind of get about that much on typically, and start at one end, kind of like icing a cake. I don't know if we have anybody out there that's ever done any of that, but a good idea to just kind of go along nice and easy. I want to put a little bit here on this end, kind of butter that up. Same deal on this other side. Let's see if I can spin this around so we get a little better view for everybody. Now there's no one exact way it always has to be done. I kind of like to show you folks at home how I like to do it. I generally like to get some coverage everywhere and then kind of come back and doctor it up a little bit, smooth it down. If you're new to this kind of stuff, doing smaller batches is probably going to be a better idea than larger batches. This is a very lightweight filler, so it's okay. It's okay if you get a little heavy on the corners. It's going to sand really nice and easy. You can do multiple coats with this. It's pretty hard sometimes to get enough coverage in just one coat, so I'm going to kind of recommend that you just plan on doing more than one, and usually multiple passes are going to be required when you're doing this kind of work. Kind of doing the same on the back side, just nice and smooth there. Coming around the ends just like that. Got a little bit here that we haven't. Now again, you can certainly mix or even make your own putties if you've got some of the colloidal silica and the microfibers, kind of depending on what you want the material to do. There's different mixtures. Sometimes you just have to work it a bit. And like I said, don't expect perfection on the first coat. A lot of times I like to kind of overfill and just get a little bit everywhere. All right. Good deal. Now you can, for your flat surfaces, got a little bit of putty left here, and we're going to just go ahead and get some coverage down here as well. It's okay to have some high spots. That's what good sandpaper is for. It's good to know what is what, though. You don't want to use a structural repair filler for fairing and smoothing. It's going to be really challenging to get it to sand properly. It's going to gum up your paper, and it's going to be real hard to sand. I'll try to turn this so everybody can. Darn close to having enough to get. It also depends on what your expectations are as far as perfection. You could wipe a really tight little coat on here, and if you're just trying to get most of the big ripples out, and you can see there's grinder marks and where the little low spots are there. Don't expect perfection, though. It'll make you crazy, folks. We're going to kind of go heavy on this top edge. Now, I have had some people before that say they like to make a profile, actually notch out a profile that's the same shape as whatever it is you're filling. I generally don't do that. I usually just try to get material on there and then kind of use the blade and just kind of drag it out. And I guess you could call that like facets almost. And the sanders will make quick work of that. Some of your heavier fillers are going to have a little more resistance. This is very light. It's almost like the consistency of whipped cream, and some of our other heavier fillers have a little more resistance. So this takes a really light touch. I mean, I am just barely putting any pressure on this, and that's about all it's going to take. Now we are going to be gel coating this in our next phase, and gel coat's got a lot of coverage. No, there's a lot of interest in gel coat, and I'm going to try to show different variations. I'd be curious to know what y'all would prefer to see. We do brush on quite a bit. We can roll it on, and we recently got a new sprayer from the gel coater that's got a 4.8 millimeter tip, and it's specifically designed for spraying gel coat, and that may be the ticket as well. So we may do some of each of that. There's pros and cons. If you don't want to spend the money on a spray rig, a brush or roll is the way to go, but you can certainly get some better cosmetics if you spray it. I'll try to wipe around those corners a little bit. Okay, that little batch was about perfect for what we're trying to do. I just got a little bit everywhere. Now, again, we're staying on top of our temperatures. I want to see where we are at the moment. 74 degrees, which is really, really nice. But again, you can go with the Wagner and to kind of hurry little projects along. But I'm just throwing a little heat. You'll notice I'm a good foot or more away, and just constantly. If you're new to doing fiberglass work, a lot of your conventional fillers in the past, or putties, they used a paste hardener, and it almost looks like a tube of toothpaste. And generally, like if you mix out a serving of it, if you were to put like say like a small pancake size portion on your blade, generally one line across that is going to be about right. So let's see what we've got. Just that little bit up to 82. A lot of times we can warm it up to about the high 80s, but you got to monitor it. You can't, without the right equipment, it's hard to know. So you always want to err on the side of safety. So our polyester filler has started to tack off there. It's firmed up quite a bit. There's still some little peaks and valleys and whatnot, but what we're gonna do is make a hot coat, what I call it. A lot of times you can kind of come in there before it fully cures and do another coat on there and try to get it on pretty rapidly. Again, remember to be careful when you're dealing with MEKP. The thicker you apply it, the more heat it will build though. This will create an exothermic reaction the more you put on there. So I'm gonna try to get a little more thickness. Same for down here on the bottom. Get plenty on there. Now I know a lot of folks like to work with epoxy, and that's a great product too. Vinyl esters can work really good. Usually your polyesters are going to be less expensive, which is nice. Save a little bit of money. Maybe the project just doesn't require it. All right, that's looking pretty good. We've got a little bit left over there, but I honestly think for what we're shooting for, I'm not shooting for perfection here. We're going to be going over with Gelcoat. Now, if you were doing paint work, paint is going to be a little thinner and it's going to be a higher gloss, so your body work needs to be better. But Gelcoat is pretty darn forgiving. A lot of times it's not going to be a glossy finish if you're just rolling, brushing, or doing sprayed with a wax. So another probably 30-35 minutes or so. Gonna get ready for some sanding. Check it out, folks. We've given this material about an hour and a half or so to cure, and I've already started the sanding process. You can see what the unsanded looks like. Always a good idea to kind of just test and see initially if it hasn't cured fully. A lot of times it'll kind of gum up your sandpaper, but I want to show you folks how easy this material sands. Now we do have some fans running behind us. That's why I like that bigger disc. See how quickly it makes work of that corner. It looked like it was going to be a lot of work to fair that, but if you kind of knock it down with the machine, use your little 3M block. We're using some 60. That's going to be some 60 grit. That's pretty aggressive. A lot of times we'll use 80 grit. Sometimes we'll go down to 120, but on the initial cut, 60 can be just fine. And we had sanded these long surfaces. Using a block is a good way to get a good straight edge. You want to be careful about putting too much pressure down in the corners. Sometimes you'll get a groove or a track. Sometimes you can sand at a downward angle into the corner a little bit. Now let's knock down this top side. Just using the machine to get the bulk of it. Start kind of rolling over the corner. Now, on this longer run, we can use the longer block. We got some 80 grit, I believe, is what's on there. But a longer block, longer run. Just take your time and be careful going around those corners there. Real easy sometimes to go through, go too far, kind of coming from different angles. See how nice that contours. Now that's just kind of the initial cut there, but that looks quite good. You can see that's looking pretty darn nice versus that's where we were just a few minutes ago. 80 grit. longer block. Woo! All right. I think that looks pretty good. Let's see if I can put my glasses on and see. There might be a few, maybe we might come back in there and touch up a little in that corner, but that would be optional. I think that looks pretty darn nice overall, and for a lot of applications that might be enough. Now you could always come in here and detail sand a little more. A lot of times I buy sandpaper in bulk. Matter of fact, y'all follow me, I have always keep an assortment of stuff. We got everything 220, 120, 400, 800. A lot of times we will finish in either 120 or 220 for this kind of stuff. Let's go back over to our piece and I'll show you. But there's some 120 for us, and I'll show you folks the difference. Now that was 60 we were sanding with just in, which is pretty darn aggressive, but even with 120 it'll take a surprising amount of material off of there and really kind of detail it. I try to just systematically go over everything a little bit. I don't really focus on getting just one area perfect. It's kind of like you want to go in like a search pattern or a search grid. Keep track of where you've sanded. Do a little bit at a time and then kind of check your work a little bit there. Same deal, back and forth. Good long runs. You just got to be careful of going in the corners too much. Sometimes the sandpaper can cut a groove in the corners if you're not careful, so it's kind of just go in there lightly. All right, maybe a little more vacuum there. All right, we're done with the vacuum. All right, folks, check that out. Now again, I could probably spend a little more time. We got nice smooth contours. That's looking pretty good. Of course, if you wanted to spend more time on that, you could, but I don't know if y'all can tell outside, it's dark. It's time for me to go home. I was hoping this would get done for us today and we were able to do it. Again, if you're enjoying the content and want to see us do more, greatly appreciate it if you go ahead and hit that little subscribe button. That tells YouTube we're doing a good job. Thumbs up, like, share. The long watch duration is also helpful as well. Captain Joe Buskins here, Fish Bump TV. My son Logan is my amazing cameraman, and we will catch you on the next episode when we're putting Gelcoat on our sample piece.